In 1965 came Francis Conrad Stuckart and his friend Dennis Ciccone. Both of these men were passionate rebels. I mean passionate. They gave lectures. They passed out pamphlets. They denounced the elected popes of the Vatican, and eventually they started their own church on Mount St. Michael in Hilliard. Francis Stuckart became the presiding bishop of the new church. And in 1984, Stuckart privately announced to his church that he himself had been crowned pope by the Blessed Virgin Mary during a 1978 pilgrimage he had made to Rome. He hadn't told anyone before then, but now it was the time to reveal this. Some of his followers began to accord him papal honors, and they began to dress in papal white robes, red slippers, and the papal white zaqueta. There he is. With his divine appointment as Pope, Adrian VII, he never formally named himself, and certainly not Adrian VII. Nevertheless, was accorded additional honors, but not everyone in his church believed Francis had actually been appointed Pope by Our Lady. In fact, most of the new church on Mount St. Michael didn't believe it. So, Pope Adrian VII, some of his devoted priests, nuns, and about 100 of his followers were driven from Mount St. Michael by the majority of his followers. And Adrian VII relocated his splinter group to that destination of every kind of mystical weirdo America has to offer, the city of Seattle. His former friend, now avowed enemy, Dennis Ciccone, took over leadership of the group on the mountain above Hilliard. Ciccone died at Mount St. Michael on August 10, 1995. And Pope Adrian VII died in Seattle on November 5th, 2006.
Now, there were ghost stories of Mount St. Michael long before these incidents with the Pope of Hilliard. There was the story of a Jesuit seminary student who threw himself off of the seminary tower and became a ghost. And perhaps the poltergeist at the Monahan Mansion on the Gonzaga campus. There was the persistent story of two ghosts in the lower cafeteria of the seminary building, told by workers employed there.
But the most frightening ghost on Mount St. Michael is the ghost of the exiled Pope Adrian VII, having returned to the mountain after his death in Seattle. The ghost of the exiled Pope Adrian VII is said to haunt Mount St. Michael. One witness swears that as she was driving up the Serpentine Road on Mount St. Michael one night towards the old cemetery, around one curve, her car's headlights suddenly played upon the ghost of the Pope, dressed in his flowing robes and papal cap and standing in the middle of the roadway. She states that she had to suddenly swerve in order to miss the apparition, and in the process nearly drove her vehicle off the Serpentine Mountain Road. She stopped her vehicle, got out of her car, and looked back. The papal ghost had vanished. Oh, those protective amulets we have passed out probably won't work to protect you in Hilliard. But then again, why take the chance?
That was weird.
Yeah, that was really weird.
So let's get recentered, if we could, into downtown Spokane. You know, I'm counting 5 haunted hotels and 11 haunted bars in downtown Spokane, just within easy walking distance of where we are now. Shall we talk about a few of them?
Oh, yes. I think we need a rest and a drink after Hilliard.
Here, here. Davenport Hotel. Everybody asks about the Davenport Hotel.
Am I talking about the Davenport Hotel? Oh, I guess I will.
Yes, what do you have to say about the
Well,
Davenport Hotel?
I'll tell you what our friend Doug Clark,
Yes.
the columnist, said about the Davenport Hotel. He said that there were more spirits in the old Davenport Hotel than in a downtown liquor store. I believe Doug was right there. You know, Spokane is a city of great and historic and valuable hotelers. Walton Carrotworthy, and Jerry and Patty Dicker. But Louis Davenport is the great-grandfather of all haunted hotels in Spokane. His fabulous Davenport Hotel opened for business on September 1, 1914, and Louis included in the hotel's plan then what he thought was going to be the nicest and grandest jazz nightclub in the United States west of the Mississippi River. September 1, 1914. And then 63 days later, catastrophe. On November 8, 1914, the state of Washington voted in prohibition, making it a serious crime to manufacture, hold, buy, store, sell, and worst of all, consume alcoholic beverages of any kind. You know, the liquor industry in Washington Territory and the early Washington state always said, if you give women the right to vote, the first thing they'll do, men, is outlaw alcoholic beverages. Women got the right to vote in 1910. It wasn't the first thing they did, it was the third thing they did. And in 1914, 5 years ahead of federal prohibition, the state of Washington went dry. Now, I can tell you, as a lawyer, a recovery lawyer, and as a lawyer from New Orleans, Louisiana, 19 years of prohibition was a very, very long time. And Louis Davenport was disappointed, to say the least. And so what he did was that he took his ornate jazz bar that was in about half of the floor of the downtown old Davenport, and after that vote came in, he had it disassembled. The parquet dance floors, the Tiffany ceilings, the ornate oak bars, the tables, the chairs, he gathered them all up and he reassembled them in the basement on the south side of the hotel and christened it the Early Bird Club. And then for 19 years, Louis Davenport ran an illegal jazz club, a speakeasy, and for 19 years on the Lincoln Street side of the Davenport, if you look at that door, there's only one place to go, and that's down the stairs to the old Early Bird. And there was always a man in a tuxedo stationed there at that entrance. That's not the place a man would go for a cold beer after mowing the grass. No, you had to have evening attire, male or female, and your credentials were checked at the door, and then you could go down to the Early Bird. The Early Bird ballroom was preserved by the Worthies when they redid the hotel in 2002, and they even preserved part of the ornate parquet dance floor as a small ballroom in the basement. And that is the scene today of a fantastic series of ghost stories. People that are passing that area guests, workers, staff members, managers that are on their way to some other affair in the basement, they have often reported hearing behind the door of the new Early Bird ballroom, it's very small, the clinking of glasses, the laughter, jazz music, and scuffling on the seat as if there's dancing. And then if you open the door, well, nothing, a dark corner. I'm glad I'm with you here tonight, because several weeks ago I was taking a small tour through the Davenport, and I told them this story, and of course I have a penchant for the dramatic. When I was telling them about the ghost of the Early Bird Club, I was going to time it with opening the door dramatically and saying, of course no one's there. And so I got to talking about the ghost, and I flung open the door and I started to say, and of course go in, and there was a maid holding towels. I thought I was going to die. A little too dramatic. But for you ladies that have been to the wonderful day spa in the basement of the Davenport, there are many women in Spokane that have seen another ghost related to the old Early Bird Speakeasy, and that is a gaunt waiter in a circa 1920s tuxedo, very thin. He's even got the linen towel on his arm, and he appears in the midst of the spa, where the women are being, whatever, treated, tortured, whatever, with his linen towel on him, and he will, according to many witnesses, he will turn and walk toward the glass doors of the spa and disappear this way. Barb?
Well, there are several Davenport Hotel ghost stories. One concerning a ghost bellman. Whether this is only one or multiple ghosts is unclear. However, all of the stories have a similar thread. The ghost was a former bellman at the hotel who today helps out his living bellmen and hotel workers. How nice. Hotel staff required to carry heavy or bulky burdens will find doors and heavy iron gates mysteriously open for them and close behind them after they have walked through. A 10th floor bellman ghost has been known to pull heavy luggage trolleys out of the elevators and mysteriously push a trolley down the hall to stop at the very room that the bellman is required to drop off the luggage.
Wow. And in 1920, a rich widow, the best kind of widow, Ellen McNamara, invited her also widowed sister and 2 grown nieces to come with her on an all-expense trip to visit several of the major cities of the West by train, and Spokane was on that list. And in August, the group arrived in Spokane and checked into a sumptuous 2-bedroom suite on the hotel's 5th floor. The plan that first night was for everybody to get dressed up and at a certain time leave the suite for dinner and a night at the theater. Just as the group was leaving their suite that night, something wasn't quite right with Ellen's wardrobe.
You girls go ahead. I'll meet you in the lobby, cafe of the hotel.
You know, she was right. Just as the other 3 women seated themselves in the cafe, down through the glass ceiling plunged the body of their relative, and it landed on the marble floor not far from their table. The Spokesman Review newspaper said that there were up to 200 people in the hotel's lobby and mezzanine that night. A physician who was just leaving the hotel's restaurant with his wife rushed over to where Ellen lay and kneeled down to see if he could help, but he couldn't. She was dying. But he reported to the newspaper later that her last words were, "Where did I go? Where has returned with her body to New York, but her ghost stayed on at the hotel, and it is there today. Her ghost is still occasionally spotted on the hotel's mezzanine in a 1920s era fashionable dress, opera gloves, and a cloche hat, repeating the phrase, "Where did I go? Where did I go?" And to this day, no one can figure out where exactly Miss McNamara went to end up crashing through the lobby ceiling. At the time, it didn't seem physically possible for her to fall, jump, or be pushed from the 5th floor and land in the lobby.
The Davenport Hotel is usually very fond of its ghost stories, even has some of the ghost stories printed out for guests in the hotel, or they're on the Davenport's website. But one ghost that you will seldom hear about in the Davenport is the ghost of Louis Davenport himself. Louis Davenport was very fond of his hotel, and he was obsessed with it. The Davenport Hotel is actually, the ghosts there are part and parcel with the Great Fire of Spokane that occurred between August 4 and 6, 1889. Because 4 months before that, in April of 1889, a 19-year-old young man named Llewellyn Davenport, Louis for short, got off the train where the steam plant is today, was the great passenger terminal of the Northern Pacific train station. And he had 2 things in his possession. He had 75 cents and his little cardboard suitcase, and he had a note from his mama. A note that his mother had given him in Omaha, Nebraska many months before, and said, "Son, if you ever find yourself stranded in Washington Territory with little or no money, look up the name of this person and the address on this piece of paper I'm giving it to you. It's my brother, your uncle. I haven't seen him in many years, but if he's still there and at this address, he will help you. He's your uncle. And go to him for help." So when the 19-year-old Llewellyn Davenport got off the train in April 1889, he started showing this note around at the train station, and really it was only a block and a half away down Lincoln, and he went down Lincoln, and there he found his uncle was operating a little snack shop, a little sandwich shop, a little greasy spoon. Yeah, his uncle helped him. Gave him a job. It wasn't much of a job. It was, wiping off the tables and sweeping up the sandwich shop. But he also gave him a place to stay. He had a little dormer room on the 2nd floor of his shop. And so 19-year-old Llewellyn, he was set. He's only 19 years old, but he had a job. He had a little money coming in. He had 3 square meals. He had a place to sleep. It was good. Until August 4, 1889, when in Bill Wolf's Cafe, just 1 block up the street, a blazing inferno came. It swept down Lincoln so quickly after it started with the wind at its back that Llewellyn and his uncle couldn't salvage anything. They had to run from the snack shop, even with a little white linen apron around their waist. They couldn't salvage anything. Everything was lost. And then 36 hours later, Spokane lay in ruins. 32 square blocks burnt to the ground, along with Louis's uncle's shop, his cardboard suitcase, and even the little note from his mother. He had nothing. He had nothing. I went through Hurricane Katrina, and it was pretty rough for several months. I lost 40% of my house in New Orleans, and we had no sewage or electricity for over 2 months. That'll make you get to know your neighbors. And I was able to witness firsthand how people react in disasters, and it's different. It's different. If you're a Buddhist, you might light a little piece of incense, say a chant, put things in perspective. Heck, I'm still alive. If you were raised Roman Catholic like me, you might go to confession and tell the priest, Father, was it my fault in some way the city of Spokane burned to the ground? But this young guy, Llewellyn, Louis Davenport, he was tough. He was very tough. Do you know, 4 days after the Great Fire, he spotted an old-timer, an old miner that was coming from Silver Valley in Idaho on his way back to Portland. He'd gone broke. Didn't find the silver. And he was leading 2 mules, and he had 2 old dirty tents on the mules. And Louis didn't have any money, but he talked the old-timer out of the 2 tents, and he pitched him over where the Hotel Lusso is today, just across from the Hotel Davenport. And then he went through the smoldering trash piles here in the center city of Spokane, and he salvaged chairs that, well, yeah, they were burned a little bit, but they were usable, and some tables, and also some kitchen equipment. He drug a stove down to the tents, and he opened a Waffle House. Don't laugh. When you're the only restaurant in Spokane, he made a killing. It was called the Waffle Foundry. This kid was smart. You know, he's 19 years old. You know, 5 years later, he has saved his money so that he can buy a half-rebuilt building just on the east side of the block that the Davenport has on Post Street. And that became the Davenport Cafe. You know, by 1910, he was listed in the Spokane Spokesman Review newspapers as one of the richest 19 multi-millionaires in Spokane. And in 1914, having put $2 million cash into his own hotel, he opened the magnificent Davenport Hotel. He had a fantastic mansion where Sacred Heart, him and his wife Veris, where Sacred Heart Hospital is today. And 4 months before the hotel was finished, he sold that mansion, and him and Veris moved into suite 1103 of the hotel and remained there their whole life. Louis died in that suite in 1951. Veris died in that suite in 1967. They had a summer place that eventually became the Episcopal School on the north side here. But Louis seldom went there. There's only one picture that I know of Louis even being in there. He hated to leave the hotel. He was obsessed with the hotel. And he was a weirdo deluxe, let me tell you that. A micromanager. We would say today he was obsessive compulsive about that hotel. He was fixated on that hotel. He ordered that every night, all of the change from the dozens of cash registers in the hotels and shops and restaurants in the hotel all be gathered up, washed and dried, and returned to the cash registers. He ordered his staff to walk as close as they could in a line on the wall of the walkways, right next to the wall, so they wouldn't wear out the carpet for the guests, right there. And he was an insomniac. Can you imagine going to work where your boss lives in the same building? He would get up 2:30, 3 in the morning, and he'd have his pajamas on, and he'd have his slippers on, and he'd put his house coat on, and then he would really sneak down to the nether regions of the hotel. You know where the the staff are vacuuming the rugs and polishing the silver, and he would sneak up behind him. Don't you hate it when people do that? And he would look over their shoulders, and if they weren't doing exactly as they've been told, you're fired on the spot. You're fired on the spot. He was a member, he was the president of the Anti-Chinese League. He just wasn't a pleasant guy to be around. And I don't know how many dozens of people I've talked to in Spokane in the last 15 years that have told me about their aunts, their uncles, their mothers, their grandfathers that worked in the hotel. And they take the position, well, his body might be, his bones might be over in Riverside Cemetery under a very unpretentious headstone, but his ghost is still there. It doesn't have to be 2:30 or 3:30 in the morning. It can be any time of the day when employees, workers are in the basement, they're in the laundry, their bellmen's, 2 or 3 bellmen are together, and they always tell the same story, a whoosh of cool air, and then they'll look over to the wall or they'll look to the hallway, and they see a wizened old man in his pajamas and house coat, bent over, and he's staring at them, and he's not smiling.
No, he's not smiling, is he? But Chet, tell us about the ghost of Vashel Lindsay. Yes.
Do I have to?
Yes, you do. Tell us the ghost. That's a great story.
Vachel Lindsay in the 1920s was perhaps the most famous poet in America. Louis Davenport was a genius at marketing. Louis Davenport had this program where he would invite famous people from all over the United States, starlets from Hollywood, maestros from New York City, film stars. He would invite them to come to Spokane, and he would comp them a suite. And it was in the middle of Prohibition, so he would also supply them unlimited liquor, food, everything's on him. And he would hope that they brought their friends along or would go back and talk about the beautiful hotel. And you know, it worked. 9 U.S. presidents have stayed in the old Davenport Hotel in its history. Well, in 1924, he invited Vachel Lindsay, the great American poet, to come to the Davenport. And Vachel Lindsay did, and checked into a suite, and stayed 5 years on Mr. Davenport's nickel. He loved the Davenport. He fell in love when he was here. He fell in love with a school teacher at Lewis and Clark High School. He married her in the suite. And then they had 2 children in the suite, one after another. In the suite, he's still on the complimentary guest list of Mr. Davenport. Well, when he was in the suite, for those 5 years, he slowly went mad, as in insane. And one thing he did is in this beautiful suite with a sitting room in it, on the 10th floor, or 1110 of the hotel. On the beautiful parquet floor, he had painted a large orange sun. And then he had an altar brought in and put there. And then he pasted pictures from the Egyptian Book of the Dead all over the walls and covered the room with candles. And by that time, he knew a lot of weirdos in Spokane, actors, actresses, ghost storytellers. And he would invite them to parties up in his suite. And this was covered by the Spokesman Review's social pages. And they said that God knows what refreshments they had before the party started. But they said that the guests to the parties would gather while Vachel Lindsay was dressed in a black kimono, reading his poetry in the candle-filled suite, and they would have scarves, and they would dance around the sun painted on the beautiful parquet floor, quote, clad only in their bathing attire. Nobody in Spokane thought that those guests were in their bathing attire. Now, Mr. Davenport, you know, he had experience putting up with these weirdos that were his guests, and Vachel Lindsay is considered Spokane's poet laureate, simply because he wrote two of his best collections of books here. A lot of people came to see him. I have his collection of books as well. So Louis put up with this, but the straw that broke the camel's back came in 1929. When Louis took his school teacher wife, they put the babies in a babysitter, and they took his school teacher wife to Paris, France on vacation. It was sort of a vacation within a vacation. He didn't check out of the hotel. And in Paris, he bought 2 life-size dolls and brought them back to Spokane and took them over to a seamstress and a tailor and had clothing made for him. And I'm not talking about little doll dresses. I'm talking about trousseaux with purses and hats and coats and seasonally appropriate clothes for the dolls. And what he began to do is at about 11 o'clock every day in his suite, he would dress the dolls in seasonally appropriate clothes. And then take the 2 dolls down to the Atrium Cafe and sit them at a table with him and order cocktails for the 3 of them. And then carry on a very animated conversation with them, after which he would order lunch for the 3 of them. And all the waiters in the hotel, they were counseled, well, this is one of Mr. Davenport's special guests. Don't laugh, give him what he wants. But when Louis Davenport heard about this, that was it. His office was on the mezzanine of the hotel. It's still there behind a secret door. And he called Vachel Lindsay up, and he told Vachel Lindsay, you're checking out, Vachel. This is it. You don't know anything, of course, but this is it. I want you out of this hotel, and I want you out today, right now, like in the next hour. I've had it with you. And so Vachel Lindsay was so annoyed. You know, he said, Louis, what is it? You don't approve of the guests I bring to lunch with me? What is this? But Mr. Davenport said, I'm not even going to talk about it. Get out of here. And so Vachel Lindsay packed up his wife and the 2 babies, and they took a taxi to the train station and caught a train back to Illinois, where he had originally come from. Middle Illinois, and he got his family settled in a rent house over in Illinois, and then he drank a bottle of Lysol. Now, you young people probably don't know what this is, but I still get wretched, want to throw up when I think of Lysol cleaner and my mother using this horrible poison to clean our bathrooms in the early 1950s. He drank it. I could think of 1,000 ways, better ways to do yourself in than Lysol cleaner, but he did. He drank the Lysol. And then from that time, his ghost has been seen in the Davenport. You know, the Davenport, we consider Vachel Lindsay our poet par excellence in Spokane. The Davenport every so often has a Vachel Lindsay party. You know, I'm his fan. I go there. You know, we read Vachel Lindsay poetry. We drink a little wine. And then we drink some more wine. And then we drink a little more wine. And we fancy sometimes we see the ghost of Vachel Lindsay, but even people that don't drink the wine see Vachel Lindsay's ghost. And the big question is, why is his ghost here? Now, we've had a lot of great concierge at the Davenport, knowledgeable men and women who are a lot of fun to talk to. My favorite concierge was Eric. He moved on to Seattle a couple of years ago. he had a theory that why we see Vachel Lindsay's ghost. And I like Eric's theory. And his theory was Vachel Lindsay was such an egomaniac that he could not believe the most famous poet in America would be kicked out of a class place like the Davenport. And so, he killed himself, he returned to Spokane, and he checked in the Davenport to annoy the managers forever. Davenport. Ghost hunters, have you examined the Davenport?
We have.
Come on up here and tell us about your examination. Get on over here.
So we
Hang on just a second. Move on up here. First of all, have you brought some ghost hunting equipment to show us this week?
We have. First of all, we use this is our SLS camera. It uses the Xbox Connect technology. We got some good results in the lobby of the Davenport. And just in case you're interested, we've posted all of our results on our Facebook page and our YouTube page, East Washington Paranormal Group.
Excellent.
Another tool we use is the K2 meter. When you turn it on, we ask simple questions. Can you please light up the K2 meter if you're with us? So forth and so on. We believe we contacted Mr. Davenport and his wife. We also got some interesting results with Ellen. When we asked if she fell or jumped, no responses. But when we asked if she was pushed, our K2 lit up. And finally, we use a flashlight. We use this for yes/no questions. We turn the head of the light where it's just barely off, and we ask Mr. Davenport, if you're with me, can you please turn on the flashlight? And we got some good results with that.
Actually, with our flashlight, when we were at the Davenport, the flashlight did not even come on until I said, do you want us to go? And I shut off the camera, and the flashlight comes on.
So that clip is on YouTube and our Facebook page.
So, like Vachel Lindsay, Mr. Davenport's ghost kicked you out of the hotel too. Huh?
Pretty much, yes.
Now, did you bring an EV device with you?
Well, this is what we use. It's called a ghost box.
A ghost box? What's a ghost box?
It is a radio that is designed to, instead of stopping on one channel, it keeps going through all the radio waves. And it uses white noise, and
That's interesting.
so with the white noise, we think the spirits can speak through that.
Wait a minute. It just said something. Sandy, hang on a second. No, Sophia.
Oh, I heard it.
You heard Sophia? Did you hear that, Mike?
Yeah, let's say it again. It says
Sophia Reeves. Sophia Reeves is what we're getting here on the EV. Is there a Sophia Reeves in this audience? Are you the same one from Hilliard? Sophia, come on up here.
It just said yeah, so you better move it.
Sophia Reeves, would you happen to be related to Jill Reeves? Yes. Our human hostess for this evening? Would you happen to have a birthday this very evening? Do you happen to be a ghost, Sophia? She doesn't think she's a ghost. Let's give Sophia a birthday